Thank you so much for joining. I am Kara Krebs, the exhibitions director at Bountiful Davis Art Center, and I am thrilled to have Mia Cinelli here today to talk with us about her design practice. Welcome, Mia.
Thank you.
Mia has an exhibition at BDAC on view through the end of this week entitled This Being Said. We have a closing reception this Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. So if you haven't seen it yet and you're in Utah, be sure to come by and check it out. And the reception won't have Mia there because she is not in the state, but we will have a good crowd, and we will have some of the artists there. So I wanted to introduce Mia, then I will turn the time over to her. After her talk, we will open up the discussion to all of you for a Q&A, so save your questions for the ends. Some background on Mia. Mia Cinelli is an assistant professor of art studio and digital design at the University of Kentucky. Her design practice encompasses an eclectic span of poetic and pragmatic products, installations, and graphics that have been exhibited nationally and internationally. Recently, her typographic works have been acknowledged with Best in Festival for new work at Design, is it Design TO?
Design TO. Mm-hmm.
Design TO. A Graphis Silver Award for Typeface Design, a Society of Typographic Arts STA 100 Award, and a Communication Arts Typography Award. With an inquiry-driven practice she is passionate about and continually excited by the possibilities of visual communication and human-centered design. I'll turn it over to Mia.
Thank you so much, Kara, for that wonderful introduction. Thanks everyone else for being here. I'm so excited to be speaking to you all. Greetings from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I'm currently on a stopover at home before I head back to Lexington, Kentucky. So I'm so thrilled to be here speaking with you all this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. If you have questions as we're going, you can feel free to put them in the chat. There's a chat below at the bottom, and we can happily get to them at the end. Or if you want to ask them at the end, that's totally fine too. And I think we just have to redo participant screen sharing. Let's see. It doesn't have permissions yet. There we go. Thank you so much. Okay. View full screen. All right, everybody can see this okay? Awesome. Okay. Well, hi. Again, thank you for that introduction. My name is Mia Cinelli. I'm an assistant professor of art studio and digital design at the University of Kentucky, where I teach in the School of Art and Visual Studies. And before I launch into this talk, I want to talk just a teeny tiny bit about my practice. And I have kind of a strange practice. So I am a multidisciplinary artist and designer. So I'm trained as a graphic designer. I've worked as a graphic designer. I teach graphic design and typography. But what I like most, and I'm also frustrated by most in my practice, is that it's not medium specific. I really just find myself running after my ideas. And sometimes they're about type, and sometimes they're about memory, and sometimes they're about gender. And sometimes I have an experience or an idea that I can't make sense of, and so I design around it. And sometimes it's for me to figure something out, and sometimes it's for other people. And so here are just a few examples of some of the many strange kinds of works that I make. So sometimes I find myself making logos for clients, and sometimes I find myself sewing parade banners to describe what's happening in the pandemic, which is what's happening in the lower left on our screen, or a weighted comfort object following the death of someone I loved, or a series of small miniature sculptures recontextualizing packaging to talk about how the past is gone and everything is disappearing. And so these are just a small series of works that I make because, as the designer Brock Davis, who I really admire, says, not every medium is appropriate for every idea. And so sometimes the work is design, sometimes the work is art, most of the time it's both. And that's how I think through my practice. But tonight, I'm going to be talking about the works that are currently on display at the Bountiful Davis Art Center in the show called This Being Said, which is a series called Speculative Characters for Visual Inflection, which is kind of a mouthful. But I'd like to take you through tonight how this work came to be and exactly what this is. And so this all began way back in 2018. And after a really long day of teaching typography and designing a typeface and talking about type, I got home and I sat down on the couch next to my husband and I just went, and he turned to me and he went, well, that's a heavy sigh. And normally that wouldn't have been like the most helpful observation, but in that moment, I was struck by the fact that the word used to denote the intent of my sigh was the same way that we would denote the weight of a typeface, like a heavy typeface. So I thought, well, what would a heavy sigh look like typographically, or even a semi-bold or an italic sigh for that matter? And so I started thinking, like, if this is something that I do, and this is like a nonverbal gesture that I use or nonverbal, or it's a verbal kind of thing, it's not a word, to communicate, why don't we have a character for this? Why don't we have a way to express this typographically in a formal kind of way? Because the reality, of course, is that so much of our communication is nonverbal, right? So we communicate with each other through hand motions, through facial expressions, through grunts, through sighs, and we know what this means. Not everything has to be written down in order to be understood. And so what I think is fascinating about language and design is that when we don't have things like our facial expressions or gestures to make meaning, we find other ways to do it. We find stand-ins like emoticons. So emoticons, which really kind of rose to prominence in the 1980s, are just recontextualized letters and punctuation that form versions of faces. And so we understand this as eyes and a tongue sticking out, and we make meaning from that. And even more recently, we use emojis. And I have to be clear in every way. I love emojis. I think they're great. I use them all the time. My only beef with emojis is that I think they lack a kind of formality. Like if I'm writing a letter to someone and I'm trying to, say how great they are or talk about, maybe displeased, I can't put this in a letter. I can't really put this in an email. It loses some of the professional tone. And the only other issue I have with emojis is that I find that they're often really too literal, albeit not always. So coming back to typography. So for those of you who are here and into typography, this is going to be a small refresher, but for those of you who are going, what exactly does she mean? Typography is just the visual arrangement of letter forms in space. Anytime you read something that's letters, someone has to have thought about how they look, how they go together, and what they mean. And what I'm really interested in my practice is what I've been calling visual inflection, which is how typefaces, or the handling of type, conveys a particular meaning or kind of tone. So when we look at everything on this slide, we can see thanks, and we can see thanks in different typefaces. So some of these feel really friendly, some of these feel really formal, even though it's the same word, and we recognize these are the same series of letters next to each other. And that's how visual inflection works. It changes the tone based on how it's set. And we can take this a little bit further because we know punctuation influences tone and meaning. When we read through all of these thanks with an exclamation point, enthusiasm, like real true thanks with a question mark, there's some skepticism there, like thanks. And we all know thanks with a period is when you are not happy about something, which really cracks me up because we all know this. Like if you send a text, thanks period, there's kind of an inference about how that's read, which I think is really interesting because no one taught us this in school. We've just inferred this. And so the big question that I had way back in 2018 was, we have some options, but what if we had more? What if we had an expanded character set for gesture and expression? What if all of these small ways of communicating could be formalized typographically? And who's done this already? Has anyone done it before? And we're going to talk about that because this particular umbrella of asking what if we do something next falls under the umbrella of what's called speculative design. And speculative design is simply asking, what if? It's thinking about design fiction. It's asking about what could we design next? How could we think through the future? It's what Matt Malpass calls using design as a medium for inquiry. Because the iPhones that we use today, right, were fiction 2 decades ago, but we have to think through them first in order perhaps for them to be real. And so what I learned as I was doing this is that there's a long history of people designing for the future. Clearly, I was not the first person to think of this. And so there is a rich, wonderful lineage of folks who were thinking about gesture and thinking about metaphor and thinking about nonverbal communication and how these things could possibly be integrated into typographic practice as we know it. So I'm going to take us way the heck back by starting with the manicule. So the manicule, also known as an index, is a specific typographic character that is simply a pointing hand. So this we start to see, I think, in the 12th century, where we have people, monks who are drawing in illustrated manuscripts, like in illuminated manuscripts, like an actual pointing finger when they're trying to show hierarchy of saying, look at this. So they're incorporating an actual physical gesture into what's happening, say, typographically. And in the Victorian era, it actually becomes its own character. So on, say, the John Wilkes Booth wanted poster for the assassination of Lincoln, at the very top of it, there is a manicule pointing, saying, hey, look here, this is important. And while it's not super commonly used in lots of digital typefaces today, you can still find the manicule as its own typographic character. And again, this is a one-to-one of a gesture pointing, saying, hey, look at this, this is important. And we can also go back to, say, 1881. All right, so this is a ways back. This is from Puck Magazine, which is a humor satirical magazine by which someone was proposing March 30th, 1881, under this article of typographical art, using punctuation to show faces. So these are the original emoticons a whole 100 years before we're actually seeing them in the 20th century, which is incredible and funny and talks about following our studies and passions and emotions. So this is already starting to think through, how do we talk through or typographically express ways of emoting? And we can even look a couple years later, 1887, from Ambrose Bierce's For Brevity and Clarity, where he turns a single parentheses on its side in the shape of a smile. And here we can then see this is supposed to be used for jocular or ironic sentences. So this is here to tell you this is meant to be funny. So this is someone who's saying, hey, how could we incorporate tone into our text in a formal way? My all-time favorite, what I think is brave and wonderful, and we should be using all the time, is a particular punctuation mark called the interrobang. And this was designed by Martin K. Spector in 1962. So Martin K. Spector worked in advertising and recognized that we all the time put exclamation points and question marks next to each other constantly when we have the end of an incredulous sentence or something really unbelievable. And so he said, why don't we just combine these? And so these ended up on some typewriters. It was used, but it didn't become really, really popular. And so I think that this is brilliant because it really was asking, what if? Why aren't we using this? If this is a natural combination anyway, why don't we just make it its own character? And so it did end up on some typewriters, and it does exist now in many typefaces, especially for typographic aficionados who think that it's brilliant and a really clever mark to be used. We can look at these examples from 2004 as a great way of thinking about tone, especially on the internet. So I think everyone probably knows sarcasm does not translate well online. There's a particular kind of tone of voice that you need in order for someone to get that you are actually being sarcastic. And so the sarcastic font movement around 2004 suggests this new font called Arial Sarcastic, which italicizes in the opposite direction, which you could use to denote where you have sarcastic tone, which I think is so brilliant. And in line with this, we have Adam Stanway's work from 2014, who is working in lineage of all of these things. So the happy mark on the left-hand side takes what we're thinking about from Ambrose Bierce's work and adds an exclamation point to it to talk about how if we read this with tone, we would know that it was happy news. We would know that this is meant with an exclamation, but with a really kind of happy attitude. And on the right-hand side, we can see sarcasticses, which are special brackets also to denote sarcasms that we actually know when people are being sarcastic. And I think that these are really brilliant. And so clearly, I'm not the first person to be thinking of this. Other people have been thinking about this for a long time, but it felt really urgent coming back to this heavy sigh, because essentially we're incorporating things anyway when we don't have the glyphs or the characters or the special symbols to do it. We're already thinking about how to incorporate gestures or actions or sounds, right? When we're giving someone a thumbs up, we might put it in asterisk to denote the action, and we might put it in brackets to say I'm being sarcastic here. Or when we have a noise that we might make with our bodies or our mouths, we might just write it out like ugh, right? And so we write things out phonetically. And so when we do things like this, I think of it like a desire path. It's already paving a way to say something else should be here instead of this. I don't think this is a really elegant solution. So this all led me to going, okay, clearly I have to design something. How exactly does one do this? So I had to really stop and think, what's going to inform this particular set of characters? And I feel the need to state these are not exclusive, they are not exhaustive, they are from my own Western viewpoint, my experience as a native English speaker, like within the United States, like these are not meant to be culturally universal. These would vary by culture, these would vary by language. So I feel the need to say that, not exclusive, not exhaustive in any way. But something that I thought a lot about was the act of physical gestures. And we know that this is so important in how we communicate with one another. So for instance, something like air quotes, when we're saying something sarcastically or we're kind of mocking someone, this action really gets lost when we try and do it typographically and we don't actually have corporeal kind of communication. We can think about physical gestures as a shorthand. We have all, driven away in a car and given someone a thumbs up as a way to say, yeah, everything's okay, we're all right. Or across a busy room and you say, yep, I'm with you, I understand, as a shorthand and as a way to communicate really quickly and effectively. Of course, facial expressions are really important. This is a way to communicate. You can communicate silently in this way. You can express displeasure or fear or delight simply by what's happening on your face, and the way in which you say something and the way in which your face responds as you say it does a lot to inform what is being said. Something else that came into play as I started to design was what's called the bouba kiki effect. And a friend of mine let me know about this, and I thought this was just fantastic. So the bouba kiki effect is a research project that has been repeated multiple times by multiple researchers across multiple languages. And I think that it's really fascinating because researchers show participants these two shapes, and they ask, which is bouba and which is kiki? And something like 90% of participants, 90-something percent, make these assignments. So this sharper shape is kiki, the rounder shape is bouba. And what this tells us is that the relationship between sound and shape is not arbitrary, which means that in designing new characters, we have to think about the sound that we're trying to represent and how it might look like the sound it's trying to represent. But what I thought was even more exciting was the fact that the letter forms, right, how the letters were shaped, also seem to kind of fall in line with this. We can see how the K's are much sharper and the B and the O and the U feel much rounder, right? So that felt really exciting and interesting and influential in this particular work. Other things that I thought about is the pace of speech. So I'm pretty excited to be sharing this with y'all. So I'm talking a little bit fast, right? Like we can anticipate, things like excitement, right? By kind of how fast we're talking, but typographically, pace of speech is important in both how things are read and how things are said. So For those of you who don't know, there are 3 different kinds of hyphens. There's a regular hyphen, which we use in compound words, things like merry-go-round or mother-in-law. And this is the shortest of the bunch because you need less time. It basically creates one word. You kind of gloss over it. And this is different than something like an N dash, which is the width of a capital letter N, which is used to signify a length of time. So Thursday through Saturday. It's a little bit longer, and it also takes a little bit longer to think and say because you have to think through the word through. And the longest of these is an M dash, the width of a capital letter M, which is used to signify a change in thought. This is what happens when you type 2 hyphens in Microsoft Word and the whole thing expands. This change of thought takes even longer. And so they get longer depending on how much time we need to think or read through them. And so I think that's really incredible and was really influential also in thinking through how long does it take to make a heavy sigh versus saying ugh, right? Like those are really different lengths of time. And so they have to be different typographically. I'm also really interested in social symbols. We understand something like a heart to mean love and affection, even though it's not necessarily representative of the thing or the action itself. And something that we use all the time without a lot of understanding of its history is, say, the ampersand. The ampersand is actually a ligature, which is a combination of 2 or more letters together, which is just a ligature of E and T, which is the Latin word for, it's et, Latin word for and. And so the ampersand itself originally looked more like an E and a T and still does in many typefaces. But here we use the ampersand in this current form without having that knowledge. And yet we all know that it means and. And so new characters developed don't necessarily have to look like what it is they're trying to do exactly in order to be understood, communicated, and used. I also wanted to think about things like context and feasibility. If I'm proposing something for the future, it has to make sense. So I spent a lot of time hand drawing out how this might work in a sentence. Could it be drawn quickly without much effort in the same way that you would normally write out other characters? Because if it's too complicated, then it becomes an illustration and not its own character. So if it takes way too long, no one's going to use it. So this is just a quick scan from one of my notebooks. Another thought I had was how could I incorporate this into something that people might recognize? And Helvetica, designed by Max Mininger in the 1950s, is one of the most commonly used typefaces of the 20th century. So you may recognize this from the Target logo, the Jeep logo, for a long time the American Airlines logo. And so I thought, if I have to design these characters, I'm going to design them to fit like they belong in Helvetica in hopes that that would make sense to the most people as possible. And as a designer, I work in an iterative process. So I spent a really long time drawing things out and trying things again and cutting things up and putting them on the walls in my studio to try and make sense of what do these characters actually look like? How are they intuitive? How are they easily drawn, easily recognized? And how are they simple and elegant and effective? And so this is a small selection of the many, many, many iterations that I went through to get to the final characters. With all of that, I'm so excited to share with you this expanded character set. And the first among them, my favorite, and I feel the need to preference that my most commonly used emoji is the red heart. This is the Affecticon, and the Affecticon is kind of like an ampersand and kind of like a heart and kind of like the corporeal action of a hug and tying together. And this is meant to represent love and respect and affection. There's the shrug sign. I know that everyone has been in a meeting, either virtual or in person, and you have no clue what's going on, and all you can do is turn to someone and go, right? The shrug, a fairly universal symbol of uncertainty. And right now, if we want to type out a shrug, we're typing out the multiple characters of like the little shrugging person. Y'all know what I'm talking about. That's not an effective solution. I want one character to tell someone that I don't know what's going on. This is the Elaticon, which is an excited wiggle. If someone tells you that something exciting is happening, if you just can't contain your excitement, the Elaticon is a great way to preface that you are stoked. This is the disgust mark. This is kind of like a frown. It's kind of like a tongue. It's kind of dripping. It's kind of gross. This is the kind of mark that we would use if we were talking about blech or yuck or ugh, instead of typing it out. This is the awkward pause, which is just a long comma. One of my favorites. This is the frustration point. This is urgent in how it's written. It's kind of sharp, it's pointy, it feels kind of like a lightning bolt. And this is a way of expressing that you are displeased. This is the typographic equivalent of as per my last email. There's the anticipation point. I know many people use multiple exclamation points when they're excited about something. And so this is proposed as its own kind of ligature. So this would be an M dash, a change of thought, connected to an exclamation point as a way of like kind of ramping up to say, I'm excited, this is great, as a way to have energy without redundancy. This is the agree mark. This is the thumbs up in the world of Facebook and Instagram. This is a quick way of saying, yeah, I agree with you. I'm on the same page. This is the cringe mark. This is a wince. This is sharp. It feels scrunched. This is the kind of face that you make, kind of like a frown when you are embarrassed, or a wince of pain, or something really kind of cringy. This is the disinterest mark. This is a dismissive gesture. This is an eye roll. This is any other way of telling someone that you are completely and utterly over it. These are our snark marks. So coming back to the initial image of the kind of bunny ears of air quotes, this is the path that follows when you make the air quotes. And so this distinguishes from normal quotes as a way to talk about when you say something and you're saying it mockingly. Yes, they were very smart. There are a whole series of quotes as well. There are worried quotes and angry quotes and skeptical quotes. And thinking about quotes like eyebrows, which show a lot of emotion and a lot of thought, I thought these could be really helpful in explaining how it is we say things or ask questions. So we can ask something in a way that is skeptical or worried or really upset. That gives more tone to understand what's being asked. And this then is the exasper icon. This is the heavy sigh. Like a crescendo and decrescendo, it is long, it is tiring, and it's a way of going, oh, it's been a day. So all of that being said, the next question that I had for myself was imagining how these could be used and their particular contexts of use, because when you propose something new for the future, I think what has to happen is thinking, how do these actually exist? And so the very first time I exhibited these in 2019 at the Lexington Art League in Lexington, Kentucky, where I live, I thought about this as both art and design. I thought about this as information. I thought about these as art prints. I thought about these as an informative way for people to learn about typography, to learn about speculative design. For maybe people who didn't have this knowledge and didn't know about this, I want to share this with them. I think this stuff is really exciting, and I hope other people do too. But upon this, I thought, what other information do I need? And when we do speculative design, we have to think about, like they do in science fiction or literature, world building. If we propose something for the future, how does it actually live? And so alongside all of these prints are things like a writing guide, which would explain what this might look like in a school. How would children learn how to write these new characters? And I was trying really hard to anticipate some needs, because when I was working on this series, I could just imagine someone saying, well, hey, the keyboard is full. We don't have any room. Yes, we do. There are places by which we could put these. And so I was really excited to think through, where would the exasper icon go? Where does the disgust mark go? Where is the anticipation point belonging on a keyboard? And so by proposing these, they in some ways become more acceptable, or they could seem more real. It's a kind of fiction that seems plausible and not totally improbable. And so also thinking through, I was really curious about, what would this look like in something outside of Helvetica, right? So aside from this, what does it look like in a geometric sans serif like Futura? What does it look like in, a really trustworthy, serif like Baskerville? And so I had a lot of fun designing some of these characters and thinking through what these could look like in different styles. How could they be used in these different ways, so that people could imagine a life beyond the prints, beyond the gallery walls, into their lives? Because the question that I get most often when I display this work and talk about this work, and I've given this lecture before and exhibited in other places, and I'm so grateful to be able to share this work through an artist talk and through the exhibition. People want to know, when can I get them? How can I get them on my phone? When can I get this in an email? And I think that's a really great question. And the practical answer to that is, I'm not really sure. I've done a tiny bit of research into the Unicode Consortium, which controls new characters and how things are typed on computers with glyphs and their kind of numerical counterpoints. And basically things need to be in wide use before they can really be encoded kind of officially. And so it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation, is how do you get people to use these things? And my thought is, I'm just going to talk about it. I'm going to use it. I'm going to hope that people in their lives say, yeah, I want these. I'm going to start using these, and I'm going to share this with other people. But even more than this, what I think is so great about speculative design is it introduces a thought. It plants a seed for people to say, maybe a different future is possible. Maybe there's a better way to do this, because how we talk to each other now more than ever matters, right? How can we be clearer? How can we be kinder? How can we be more empathetic? How can we be really certain about what we're saying and how it's understood? Because I think that's paramount. I really do, in communicating with each other and getting along and trying to do the right thing and trying to say what it is you really mean to say. Because the reality is, we're going to barrel into the future anyway. So we might as well start thinking about what we want this to look like. And that's it. Thank you so much, everybody.
Wow. Thank you so much, Mia. That is so fascinating.
Thank you.
I don't know if you saw the chat. Cheryl Roush said, these are fabulous. And Liz said, I love this whole show at BDAC. When I went through it, the different fonts were my favorite part of it.
Thank you, Liz. Oh, thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah. So let's turn it over to a Q&A now. If you want, if you're shy or if you'd rather not speak, feel free to type it in the chat or raise your hands or mention in the chat that you have a question. I'm curious, what are you all thinking about? What questions do you have? I know I have a lot. Maybe I should start. Is that okay?
Totally fine.
Okay, okay. So you were just talking about how everybody asks, how do I get these? I was wondering, have you ever added these two fonts so that you could install it and work with it? Because I know you don't have to get approval for that. You can just do that, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes. Last summer, I was designing typeface as part of an artist residency. And when I finished it, I thought, wait a minute, I have these characters. And so I added in just a couple. I didn't add all of them, but I added in the anticipation point and the effecticon, and maybe the frustration point. I can't remember now. but there were several that I included in, and I was able to do a tiny bit of coding. So in typeface design, sometimes you can substitute things out. And so sometimes these are really simple substitutions, like subbing an ellipsis for when you type 3 periods, because they're different characters. And so I made some substitutions where if someone were to type an M dash and an exclamation point, it would automatically adjust to the anticipation point. And so it's kind of an Easter egg in the typeface. And after I designed that, I put a little guide on my website that people could download. So if future typeface designers were interested, they would know, oh, this is what we could sub for. This is, maybe we could include these. Because my hope is that maybe, if very slowly, these exist in typefaces, people will go, that makes sense. I want this character in other places, or maybe they'll start to handwrite it out. So long story short is yes, in a very limited capacity. And it is my selfish hope maybe that people will add it into their own typefaces.
Oh, that is awesome. So like, what would you have called that? Like, would you have just put it into Helvetica, and would it be like altered Helvetica? Or
oh, I wish. I think I'd be too afraid to. I felt comfortable putting it in my own typeface because I thought, okay, I have control over this typeface. I know kind of what this font's going to look like, but I would be really hesitant to tread on anybody else's IP and kind of add that in. But the fact that these live in Helvetica as their own kind of images, people I'm sure could add them in to already kind of typed things. But I think if I had a bit more pirate spirit, I think I would add them. But I think people could use them in a different capacity. Let's see. Oh, there's a question in the chat. Okay.
oh, I can hear you.
Okay, let's see. I love these. You can add custom emojis in Slack if you thought about setting up downloadable, uploadable file they have, like this example. That's so helpful, Brooke. Yeah, I've had a brief conversation. I'm pretty new to Slack, but a friend of mine recently said, hey, can we get these for this? And so I think that would be a really great next move. And I deeply appreciate the suggestion. Thank you for that. That's so exciting. I'm going to save that link for later.
Are any of your files publicly available currently, where people could use them? Where would they find those?
Those all exist on my website. There's a little download page so people could find those and use them and learn about what they are. And then the typeface that I designed last summer is called Mackinac 1895, which is a historic script based on some historic handwriting from Northern Michigan. And that includes these particular characters as well. So that's free for personal and commercial use, available on my website if anyone is interested. That all exists there at miacinelli.com.
That is exciting. I'll just put that miacinelli.com in the chat.
These are great questions.
I have another one. So, do you feel that it is important to incorporate historical design and letter forms into what you're making? Like, I feel like maybe this was something else, but I feel like in your show you had some kind of swoops, like to indicate like what did you call it? Was it cheerful? Do you remember what like maybe the time or the emotion that historical
the jocular mark, the Ambrose Bierce mark that was in the presentation. I mean, I think that it's really helpful to know what other people have done before. Again, I'm clearly not the first person to think of these things. And I think that there are, like, the smiley face emoticon, I think is classic and brilliant. You know, I think that even if we're using the emoji of the smiley face, I think truly it's as effective as the colon and the semicolon and the parentheses acting as that smile. So I love that kind of lineage through of thinking about how we're expressing ourselves, like what is referencing kind of like facial expressions. And so it was helpful to look at in that way of going, okay, what have other people done? I don't want to do something that someone else has done, you know, clearly. but I, in some ways, I want all of these marks to exist. And I feel the need also to state that when I talked about the history of speculative design, this is a small slice. Like there are a lot of people who have worked with speculative typography and new punctuation and ways of thinking through what new kinds of punctuation could exist. And so for those folks who are interested, like there's more, there's much more. And there are some people who've had you know, a lot of things in the 20th century, like really great solutions that I would love to see. Even if I didn't design them, I want to see them in the world because I think that they're really, really brilliant.
How do they get established? Like how did we end up using smiley face emojis and I don't know,
That's
even
really good question.
emoticons?
Yeah, I wish that I had like a really great, a really like thorough knowledge of exactly how those kind of linguistic and typographical trends spread. My best guess is that you know, people who are influential use them, they become common in that way. You know, it becomes common in a small circle and then it spreads, or people decide, hey, this is cool, like any kind of trend. And language is fascinating because it's always evolving, always, always. And so I think a next step also for me is to talk to a linguist or someone who has a great history of how language develops, because I think some of it is organic and some things, you know, we can think about like language trends from the 90s or the 80s and words that we don't, you know, like I don't think anyone's going to say fetch, you know, or the as if to describe something, right? I just watched Clueless recently, so that's in my brain. But like those kind of things that are really specific to a time period that maybe don't like catch on in writing or maybe are only of a specific time period. While there are other things like okay, you know, the word that we use okay to describe yes, things are fine, you know, that developed at some point, right? Like that word was introduced and now we use it all the time and don't even think about it. Yeah. Oh, there's another question. Most symbols are about sarcasm, yet we are supposed to be nicer to each other. Insert snark quotes here. Any thoughts? Yeah, that is a really good question. I think in the particular set that I designed, that is a good question. I think some of it's about clarity. So things like snark marks, right? Like that does clarify something, I suppose, in kind of a downer way, right? To talk about sarcasm. But I think that's a way in which maybe in being clearer about something, even if you're being snarky, may avoid hurting someone's feelings because it's clearer that that's what you're doing. Or something like the Helvetica, I think could add in to, you know, affection and love in that way, or by sharing something like the shrug sign, maybe there's solidarity in uncertainty together. But that's a really good question. Oh, just in general on social media. That's also a really great question. And I don't have a great answer. I think that, I think it's easy. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good way of talking about that. I think it's easy to be negative. I think it's an easy thing to fall into. And so I think a lot of people may have been designing for that because it's common. Yeah. That's the best explanation I have at this moment, but I'm not sure how accurate that is. Thank you for asking, Barbara. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I guess if you're going to be sarcastic or say something negative anyway, then you probably don't want people to be confused.
Yeah.
It's not going to help.
Awesome. Are there any other questions? Anything else that I can clarify?
I was wondering, have you
Sure.
considered collaborating with people in other cultures or who speak other languages to make letter forms that communicate to them?
You know what? That's a really great question, and I think an important question to ask. My hope is that as this maybe develops or continues, that, you know, the right person comes along and says, hey, this is something that's really particular in, you know, a language that I speak. What could this be? Or even if this inspires someone to make their own, I think that would be excellent. I think that would really, really be exciting as a way to capture nuance and gesture, which of course varies by language and culture. So I would hope that rather than maybe, I would hope it would be really inspirational and empower someone else to try it themselves.
Yeah, that would be exciting.
I think so too. I think it'd be really exciting. cool. I was having a moment looking for a light in this room, and I'm not entirely sure where it is. That was my getting up and looking around.
Well, thank
for just a
you.
moment.
Thank you for staying up and doing this talk, even though
of
you're
course.
in a different time zone.
I'm happy to. This has been a total joy. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the Bountiful Davis Art Center for having my work and hosting this artist talk. Kara, thank you for all of your hard work and expertise and everything to make this happen. I'm so thrilled to be sharing this work. If you have any questions, if after this you go, wait, there was something I wanted to ask, I didn't get a chance to, you can get a hold of me on my website. Feel free to follow up, but I'm really grateful for your time and your attention and for spending your Tuesday evening with us. It's been a really fun time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mia. And we just had a question in the chat, if this will be available on the BDAC website. And yes, we'll have this on Mia's page, which is at bdac.org/this being said. I'll put it in the, yeah, I'll put it in the chat, but you'll be able to find it by going to our exhibitions. And I think we can put this on, we'll talk, but I think we can put this on our YouTube channel too. But thank you so much, Mia. This was amazing. And it's been really fun to learn about this. Have a good night. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Take care, y'all. Be well. Thanks again.